2012 saw a crossover that should have happened a very long time ago. The director of The Warriors, Streets of Fire, and 48 Hours paired up with the star of the Rocky and Rambo franchise with the intention of creating an action thriller that harkens back to the action films of the 80s and 70s. And yet, I waited for this movie to play in cinemas, and it came and disappeared with little fanfare.
Ho 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 ho! Delightfully devilish, Seymour.
Yes, everybody, welcome back to Delightfully Devilish, the show where we discuss films that all at once meet the criteria of being the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'm your host, Jukebox Harry, and today we're going to be delving back into the very long filmography of Sylvester Stallone. Bullet to the Head is a 2012 action thriller directed by Walter Hill and featuring a pretty prestigious cast, which includes Sylvester Stallone, Sung Kang, Jason Momoa, Christian Slater, and Adewale Akintoye Agbaje. It also features John Cena, who I had the pleasure of working with on the production of La Brea, and I've got to say, he is one of the most talented and nicest celebrities I've ever worked with. I'm someone who appreciates The Warriors and Streets of Fire. I'm also a big fan of 48 Hours, as well as Walter Hill's film Crossroads, and I also enjoyed Trespass and Extreme Prejudice. Unfortunately, the rest of his filmography I can't say much about. During research for this video, I made an active effort to try to watch every film directed by Walter Hill, so now I've got to list everyone which failed to make an impact on me. Another 48 Hours, Hard Times, Johnny Handsome, Red Heat, Southern Comfort, Brewster's Millions, Geronimo, An American Legend, The Assignment, Wild Bill, The Driver, Last Man Standing, and Undisputed. We've also got Supernova, which was awful, but very little of what Walter Hill actually shot ended up in that film due to studio interference, so I don't really count that. Case in point, Walter Hill very rarely makes an impact on me. Bullet to the Head was a film I was very excited about, but it ended up being Sylvester Stallone's worst opening weekend since Nighthawks. The film ended up grossing only $22.6 million on a budget estimated between $40 and $55 million, and reviews are mixed. And I have watched this film thrice.
Not once, not twice, but thrice.
I watched it 10 years ago when it originally came out, I watched it about a month ago, and I watched it again in preparation for this video. And on each occasion I found there are things I like about the film, and a lot of things I don't like. So I had to decide once and for all if I actually like Bullet to the Head. The first thing you'll notice about Bullet to the Head is that it doesn't follow the style of a typical Walter Hill film. In a similar fashion as Suicide Squad, Bullet to the Head uses jump cuts, sped up frames, and flashes of light to create a jittered and uneasy mood. This is done seemingly to give the film a comic book feel, which is appropriate considering that it's based on a French graphic novel, but it's a style of filmmaking that's completely overused in the modern day. And people actively seeking out a Walter Hill film are probably looking for something old-fashioned, not flashy and modern. Sylvester Stallone plays Jimmy Bobo Bonomo, a hitman. And funnily enough, this is the same name as a fictional person that his character in the film Oscar worked for, so I guess that puts new meaning to the phrase, be your own boss. Along with his partner Louis, they execute a guy with a bullet to the head.
Oh, that's why they call it that.
Then we're in a bar, and Jason Momoa's character comes up and murders Louis. So even though we haven't had time to learn about this character or why we should care about him, he's just killed off like that. Honestly, it would have been good to give the character more screen time because he'd get more substance, but also because John Cena is really talented as an actor and he could have made him into an interesting character. I am heavily biased when I say that, but I've been watching The Pacific this past week and the man's acting talents are very obvious. Then Aquaman goes to kill Bobo and fails, turning into the film's first fight scene, and the entire thing is pretty jarring to look at. With a mix of quick cuts, quick zooms, and constantly shifting camera placement, Bullet to the Head's first action scene does little else than reminding me of the disappointing action climax from Streets of Fire when two characters fought with sledgehammers in a flurry of ugly jump cuts. Hill wanted this film to be a throwback to action films of the 70s and 80s, but it should be a throwback to something we want to remember. I didn't want to remember the ending from Streets of Fire. It was incredibly anticlimactic and disappointing.
What do you know about Mr. Greeley?
Ex-WDC P.D, detective grade. For about 6 months, he was my partner. He was kicked off the force in complete disgrace. Cop gone real bad, drunk, gambling.
How original.
He stole evidence from a case he was working. We still don't know what it was.
Daring today, aren't we?
Give me a speed check on a Louis Blanchard, local, reputed hitman. Give me any known associates.
We've come up with 2 hits. Louis Blanchard, 37 years old with a long list of priors.
37?
The known associate of one James Bonomo, a.k.a. Jimmy Bobo, suspected hitman. 26 arrests, 2 convictions. I'll send you his current contact information via local parole board database.
So this guy, Louis Blanchard, is a known associate of a James Bonomo, a.k.a. Jimmy Bobo. They work together and they possibly fit the profile of Greeley's killers.
Very good. Get all that off your cell.
So I take it we're looking for this Jimmy Bobo?
But my homicide division is more than capable of handling this matter without your help.
You know, I think I'll stick around for a while.
None of the dialogue in this film seems to have any personality. It seems like the writers just had their heart set on following every cliche police thriller piece of dialogue in the book. Where have I seen / reviewed that before?
It's easy to get sentimental about things.
Yes, very sentimental.
Lewis was a big boy. He knew he took his chances. I worked with him the last 6 years. He never caused me a problem. But still, we did our job. Then we got set up.
We don't get any shots of Bobo mourning the death of his partner. Louis Blanchard is used just as a throwaway character and as a plot device. Even though he's the driving force behind the protagonist's actions in the movie, he's relatively meaningless because there's no depth. But hey, at least the film remembered to put in some voiceover narration to fill in the gaps. This is often used to fill in the gaps that couldn't be worked organically into the dialogue or to provide heavy exposition, and in this film it's both.
And God help you if you use voiceover in your work, my friends. God help you. It's flaccid, sloppy writing.
You carry bullet bourbon?
No.
Yeah, well, I do.
Bullet bourbon is not a hard alcohol to find. It's one of my father's favorites. But Bobo can't find it at any bar in New Orleans, apparently.
You know what? Let's just watch some flashbacks.
Double bullet.
What's that?
Some kind of whiskey nobody's ever heard of.
This plot point gets more attention than the death of Louis Blanchard. Come on. Ugh, this coffee is cold and bitter. Ugh.
This isn't a sting. I'm alone.
I wouldn't be here if you weren't.
I'm not really interested in some disposable hired hitter. No offense. Like, I want the guys who did the hiring. You know, the same guys who took out your partner. You know, they probably held out on you. Owe you some money. Let's work together. We can help each other out.
I don't work with cops.
Should have a drink for Louis. It's probably the only thing you'll ever do for him.
Yeah, because he sure as shit ain't gonna mourn for him. The script just won't allow it. Then this whole scene just cuts off incredibly quickly. Bullet to the Head doesn't allow any time for anything to develop in its story. It keeps on moving incredibly quickly, which as a result makes it incredibly hollow, more hollow than a Sylvester Stallone film typically is. Quan investigates, which leads to a shootout with some corrupt cops. He's able to disable one, but the gunfire from the second demands the help of Caitlyn Jenner.
Buckle up, buckaroo!
I count 2 guns, nigga.
You got 2 choices. You come with me and get fixed up, or get out here and wait for the cops. Your choice.
Meanwhile,
that scumbag Greeley knew he needed some kind of insurance policy in order to blackmail us, so he found Baby Jack. And he gave him his evidence file for safekeeping. All of it proving that we paid off a congressman to steer a government contract our way.
It's plot exposition. It has to go somewhere.
We have an informant inside his crew. He gave us the location of the file.
I want you to destroy it.
And that scene ends pretty quickly. Everyone was on screen for a few seconds, crammed in as much exposition as they could, and then left before the audience had a chance to comprehend what the hell happened. In writing this review, I constantly had to be rewinding the film and double-checking the plot points with what was listed on the Wikipedia plot summary to confirm that I knew what was going on. Seriously, for a very simple premise, this film gets a whole lot more convoluted and confusing than it has any right to be. Quan gets his bullet removed and stitched up.
You can't beat a classic stitch-up, I reckon.
Nothing of any relevance happens in this scene. Then Aquaman goes and assassinates a bunch of people because these guys had a document which listed all of Killer Croc's illegal activities. Then he shoots everyone in the bar. And honestly, at this point, I started to ask myself, why am I reviewing this film? Why does it meet Delightfully Devilish status? Because so far, we haven't really had any major sign of what makes it meet that criteria. But I knew there was something about Bullet to the Head that set off something in my brain. So I just had to keep going.
Okay, that was a bit much.
He said take these. Extract the white tiger juice. Put a little power in your pencil there, pal.
Oh, white tiger juice, my ass. What about the good old Asians can't drive joke?
You guys can drive, it's a fact, no doubt about it.
I love racism!
So we're going to get just enough dialogue from the characters to make them unlikable, but not enough to actually delve into them and give them any sense of characterization. You know, when you make a half-assed attempt like that, it doesn't come across as noble, it just makes the mediocrity a whole lot louder.
So who hired you to take out Greeley?
In my line of work, we generally go through a handler. This time it's this jerk named Ronnie Earl.
Hey, give me a speed check on Ronnie, a.k.a. Ronald Earl. Crescent City local.
Right. Now you're doing your job.
Bobo goes to visit the guy who hired him and Louis to make the hit to find out who he's working for.
Baptiste.
All right, that's the brother's name, Marcus Baptiste. He's a lawyer, and he's got an office down in the CBD, and he's got a big old fucking mansion in the Garden District, all right?
When Bobo's gun jams, we get another fight scene. So we get another collection of ugly quick cuts, inconsistent shifting camera angles with too much zoom and a bit of shaky cam. The only other time I saw a Sylvester Stallone film that had this kind of problem with the action was in Cobra. Bullet to the Head keeps bringing me back to Cobra, and as I discussed in my review, that is one of the worst Sylvester Stallone films I've ever seen. As a throwback to action films of yesteryear, Bullet to the Head keeps reminding me of the wrong ones.
What you say?
Don't touch my gun! What the hell do you think you're taking a firing pin out of my piece? Huh?
Okay. All right. Yeah, maybe it was a mistake, all right?
Mistake?
Yeah. But I'm a cop. You know, I can't let you go on some fucking killing spree!
Yeah, well, it's gonna get worse. If you can't handle it, go home!
Hey, fuck you! You know, if it wasn't for me, you'd still be scratching your ass looking for Ronnie Earl.
This is one of the very few glimpses of conflict you'll get to see between the two main characters, and when the film were moving at a rocket-like pace, it's over as quickly as it starts. After discovering Baptiste's location, they attend a party he's hosting, putting absolute minimal effort into their incredibly conspicuous disguises. For the record, Baptiste is Christian Slater's character. You'll be forgiven for forgetting that. Like I said, there's so much to keep up with, and yet so little going on. It's kind of a mindfuck how this movie becomes so confusing. Bobo knocks him out and drags him out of the party, but he wakes up and attacks our heroes whilst they're driving, and unfortunately, even though this is an off-road car scene featuring Sun Kang, we don't get any Tokyo drifting.
Well, that sucks.
You let two unknown men enter this house uninvited. Then you allow them to take the owner, and then, unmolested, they drive off into the middle of the night.
That's a little unfair. Drunks walk in and out of these parties all the time.
Sounds like your security staff needs a pretty big overhaul.
I don't remember sending you an invitation, but I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Oh, I did. Great costumes.
You don't get the right to say that after the incredible lack of effort you put into yours.
What do you want?
The tall guy that killed Lewis.
Tall guy, yeah, it's Keegan.
Yeah, what's his deal?
He's FFL, ex-mercenary, Central Africa, West Lebanon. Now, he contracts out to Robert Nakomo Morel.
Why'd you set me and Lewis up?
Morel didn't want to take any chance that Greeley's death could be traced back to us. Greeley was investigating Morel in D.C. Evidence of his payoffs to congressmen, senators, judges. Thought he could blackmail Morel. Didn't realize who he was fucking with. That's it.
All this exposition is wearing me out.
It's around my neck. I copied Greeley's whole life. Names, dates, accounts, a little insurance policy in case Morel got clever. I don't want to get myself killed here.
Wait for it.
Keegan's gonna punch your ticket, and I'm gonna be there, and I am gonna watch. I'm gonna have a front row fucking seat. You stupid and slopey son of a bitch! Who that is? Who that is?
Keegan and his associates empty their guns into the building, but our heroes swim to safety. Admittedly, Bullet to the Head is very practical with its stunts and explosions instead of using CGI, but it's pretty clear that every time the film is short on ideas, they just throw more violence into the mix. And as we've seen, it's frequently mishandled from a technical perspective.
Bob, get the fuck out!
Then we go to Bobo's daughter's house.
What are you doing here?
I'm sorry, you must have not heard us. We were trying to be quiet so we didn't wake you up.
Yeah, if you're trying to be quiet, she's probably not going to hear you, Chief.
Do you mind if I use your computer?
Oh, that's cute.
What?
Yeah, we gotta find this guy, Robert Nakomo Morel.
The two continue their mission after a very brief and all too familiar conversation about how Bobo could have been a better father.
Okay, when I do this dance again, I tell you what, unless you're willing to pull that trigger and put a bullet to the head.
He said it! He said it!
That 9mm ain't gonna be much help.
Get out.
After another extremely shaky scene full of jump cuts where Keegan comes to capture Bobo's daughter, we see Police Detective Quan reporting his findings to the coppers.
Guy in charge is named Morel. Greeley found out about this in D.C. and came down here to blackmail him.
Yeah, I know the rest. I told you to go home.
I know, I've heard the speech. We should have taken him in.
To its credit, this film definitely delivers on its title, and you could also make a drinking game out of this movie of taking a drink every time someone dies, or taking a drink every time someone gets double-crossed. Now, both those things have happened to two characters in this scene, so that's 4 drinks, people.
Yeah.
Jerry! The Japanese guys had sake in the hot tub. You gotta get them out of the drawers and get them down here, or I don't have a focus group to sell the pilot to Japanese TV.
Who's this?
Jerry!
Someone wants to say hi.
Speak.
Jimmy.
So what are we gonna do?
I want to get her back, give them what they want, then they die.
Bobo goes to talk with the bad guys, agreeing to trade Quan and all the evidence of Morel's crimes for his daughter. And this is the scene where I remembered exactly why I needed to review this film. That's 2 drinks right there.
You don't have an argument with me.
Why? Because fuck them, that's why.
Bullet to the Head somehow has the idea that back-to-back murders and double crosses build a narrative. And it fucking doesn't. This scene doesn't make sense. The sole motivation behind Keegan murdering everyone is just the fact that apparently he likes killing people. He apparently gets some kind of satisfaction out of being the top dog that murders everyone. It's so cliche and so bereft of meaning or substance or reason. It's just killing for the sake of killing. And so much of Bullet to the Head is that. This is where all the flaws in the film just fucking collide. Where the cliche narrative of the bad guy betraying everyone and everyone getting double-crossed in a fucking convoluted, confusing reasoning, it just hits each other. Oh god, this...
Cool, I broke his brain.
After a few more grisly executions, Bullet to the Head arrives at its climax.
Ready for another round?
For similarly inexplicable but also cliche reasons, Keegan throws his gun away and decides to challenge Bobo to an axe fight.
What are we, fucking Vikings?
Pick it up.
Settle the fuck down.
Obviously this scene is meant to be a pissing contest between the characters, but logically the guy had a clear window to get away with all his crimes, so he's putting it all in jeopardy. Professional, my ass. This film turns into a very firm throwback to Walter Hill's Streets of Fire, which concluded with the aforementioned sledgehammer fight. It was primarily memorable because, like I said, it was shot and edited atrociously, and Bullet to the Head seemingly wants to recreate that note for note.
I'm impressed.
I'm not. All the violent but poorly handled action scenes in Bullet to the Head led up to a climax, which was predictably violent, but also incredibly poorly handled, and thus anticlimactic as hell. There are a ridiculous amount of jump cuts and inconsistent camera angles which ultimately blunt the impact that Walter Hill was going for. It's not the worst example of these techniques being misused, but it's incredibly jarring to look at. And with both Sylvester Stallone and Jason Momoa doing their own stunts, they both deserve way better. I don't get how Walter Hill is so inconsistent in how he handles action scenes. He's done ones that are just fine, like in Trespass, Extreme Prejudice, or 48 Hours. But he's done incredibly anticlimactic finales in this movie, in Streets of Fire, and also in Undisputed, where the entire film was leading up to one climactic boxing match which ended up being shot from all the worst angles you could shoot a boxing scene from. The scene concludes with Bobo stabbing Keegan in the foot and jamming him with Louis' knife.
Keegan went rogue upstairs and killed Morel and the rest of them. We still gotta sort out, you and me. By the law.
I am the law! Keegan shot the guys upstairs. Tell him I shot the rest. You tried to stop me, and I shot you too. Make that your story.
And the two meet up later down the track in a bar.
I decided to get a tattoo.
Really?
Yeah, Lisa came down to the hospital to visit me a lot.
The hospital?
Yeah, the hospital, that's what he said.
I'm not gonna come after you for anything you did in the past. But you break the law again, and I hear about it, oh, you're going down.
That'll be the day.
The end. Is Bullet to the Head a good film?
It's really not.
I've been trying to put my finger on exactly what it is about Bullet to the Head that bothers me, and then it clicked. The film has no personality. Sylvester Stallone films very rarely lack personality. Whether they're good or bad, they're eccentric in some kind of way. But Bullet to the Head is one of the most generic movies in his filmography that he starred in. Take Avenging Angelo, that's probably Sylvester Stallone's worst movie, but it still tried to combine elements of being a crime thriller with a romantic comedy. So that made it memorable, even if it wasn't memorable for being good in any way, shape or form. And then look at Detox. That movie challenged Sylvester Stallone to go against type and play a vulnerable man in a detox facility, and the premise ended up being a mishmash between elements of The Thing and The Shining, whether or not you like the movie or not. I personally didn't mind it, but I haven't watched it for a long time. And then look at Lockup. That movie was a strange hybrid between elements of First Blood and Cool Hand Luke. Over the Top was a ridiculously strange mishmash of genres, tones, and 80s tropes. And Daylight saw the man taking on the disaster genre. This is why I love Sylvester Stallone. He's fascinating to watch, even when the films aren't great. But He also made Cobra, and in my review of that, I talked about how that movie set itself on autopilot, going through all the genre tropes and never really having any kind of soul. Now, Bullet to the Head is a fundamentally way better film than Cobra, but it's still very similar in some of its flaws. Walter Hill wanted this to be an homage to action films of the 70s and 80s. He was quoted as saying, "We're not breaking new ground. We're trying to entertain within a format that's familiar." So by his own admission, he was intentionally retreading similar ground to films such as Cobra and his own work such as 48 Hours, another buddy action thriller. Naturally, there's nothing wrong with treading old ground if it's done correctly, but Bullet to the Head feels too much like the director and the star were both on autopilot the entire time. Bullet to the Head has a story you've seen countless times before, and it does not try to disguise it. But for some strange reason, it jams its brief 90-minute running time with a huge number of thin characters, all of whom betray and murder one another to the point that it quickly becomes a repetitive chore until it reaches a climax which is jam-packed full of twists and violence to the detriment of any sensibility the film once had. It follows a generic path and yet is also confusing all the way through until it reaches that climax, which is both predictable and nonsensical. If we had a little bit more time to flesh out the story and the characters, then it might transcend its formulaic roots. And that highlights the other core problem with Bullet to the Head. Realistically, it did have the potential to be so much more. Originally, the film was going to be directed by Wayne Kramer, the director of The Cooler, but he dropped out because he wanted to make a much darker film which conflicted with Sylvester Stallone's vision. And originally, the role that Sung Kang played was not meant to be an Asian character. When Wayne Kramer dropped out of directing duties, it was actually Thomas Jane who personally suggested Walter Hill come on board as director. And when he came on board, producer Joel Silver came on board. And when Joel Silver came on board, he wanted an actor with more ethnicity so the film would appeal to a wider market, which led to Thomas Jane, the man who got the director on the movie, having to drop out of the project. And the film did not end up succeeding at box office, so that whole decision didn't really end up proving successful. Nonetheless, by giving the directorial duties to Walter Hill, you're bringing in an old-fashioned filmmaker who has approached every film he's ever made as a Western. In a sense, his role in the film is reflected through the protagonist, Jimmy Bobo. He's a man with an old-fashioned approach to violence in a changing time where there is intense scrutiny for everything to be done by the book. The contrast between the two is sharp, and if Bullet to the Head tried to play off the chemistry between the two actors and flesh it out more, then the story would have been a lot more complex for the right reasons. Both of them are instead stranded in one-dimensional roles where they have little else to do but play the characters as archetypes with what little direction Walter Hill will give them. Admittedly, with the talent of the two leading actors, they do a decent job, and that's working with Walter Hill, a director who has actively said that he does not know how to direct actors. He can bring out the best in actors who know how to play to their own strengths naturally. And that's why when he directed Michael Paré in Streets of Fire, the man gave a very flawed and one-dimensional performance. With Sylvester Stallone, Hill was quoted as saying he told the man to play things more casually. "I wanted him to play his natural personality as much as possible. He's a very engaging guy," I told him. "I'm not interested in you inventing a character as much as you imagining yourself as a character." He went right with that. Stallone's gruff persona is perfectly suited to the role of Bobo. He doesn't go over the top with the drama, nor does he ever seem disinterested in it, playing the character as a straightforward, old-fashioned hitman. It contrasts Sung Kang, who plays Detective Kwon, as a very formal figure of the law, a well-spoken and intuitive detective who was forced into a partnership to deal with a world that he is too unfamiliar with. The two deliver great, very natural performances, and the lack of character depth given to them really is a shame. Walter Hill's ambition was to make an anti-buddy film where the protagonists never become friends, but end up with a begrudging respect for each other. While I like this idea and its lack of cheap gimmicks, it also limits how much Bullet to the Head actually delves into the conflict between the two characters, which leaves the majority of their conversations to be meaningless placeholder dialogue. But as for the rest of the cast, all the other characters seem to have even less personality to them. Keegan is an empty shell of an assassin, but Jason Momoa naturally makes for a threatening bad guy, both physically and with his line delivery. Christian Slater is cast with providing as much exposition as he can with his limited screen time, and it's not a good job to have, but he does it with such sincerity for the drama that his performance is commendable. And as for Adewale Akinnuoye Apgaje, he just plays a throwaway bad guy. He does just fine, but deserves better. Having gone through all of Walter Hill's filmography to make this video, I've come to realize I'm not a fan of his directorial style. He makes films which often aren't really about anything and contrast extended talkative scenes with violent action, which admittedly are a lot more intense as a result. And I do consider Bullet to the Head to be one of his better directed films because it's a very atmospheric experience, using gorgeous New Orleans scenery and an intense musical score which gives an organic Louisiana feeling to audiences. The film also moves along at a brisk pace, and while it rushes past certain plot points which can make things confusing, it tries to get to the point as often as it can in an effort not to get too boring. It's a shame that the action scenes are handled with too many jump cuts and an excess of zoom, because Hill is noble in his ambitions to give audiences some old-fashioned violence. Unfortunately, his ambitions aren't backed up with enough substance to justify what he's aiming for, and if the action scenes were better, honestly, I could give this film a much better review, but sadly that's not the case. Bullet to the Head gets 4 bullets to the head out of 10. It has atmosphere, noble ambitions, and 2 solid leading men. But unfortunately, with a premise that is both too confusing and too generic for its own good, it ends up being a one-dimensional film that just leaves audiences pining for more. And that does it for today's episode of Delightfully Devilish, you guys. If there are any movies you want to see me discuss on this show, please leave them in the comment section below. If you want to see more episodes of this show, please hit that subscribe button. Otherwise, till next time, I've been your host, Jukebox Harry. Peace.